You are listening to the Enormocast.
Remember, folks, that when you buy from our sponsors, you're supporting the Enormocast. And in turn, Black Diamond Equipment is supporting many of the organizations that are protecting our climbing areas and keeping access open, including the Access Fund and even the Nature Conservancy, the folks that hold the keys to many of the best cliffs in Indian Creek. And this month, Black Diamond Equipment is donating 1% of sales to the Nature Conservancy. So if you've got some goals in mind this spring and you need some gear, head over to blackdiamondequipment.com and pick up a few things for that manky rack or to put on your back to keep you warm and dry while charging that springtime mission. Black Diamond Equipment is a proud sponsor of the Enormocast. So our friends over at the Climbing Zine have made it to double digits, if only by the skin of their fingertips. The once black and white punk rock style zine has been elevated to magazine status, but they never forget their roots. Volume 10, the Raw issue, is a tribute to that. There's Patience by seminal master of prose and bouldering Chris Schulte. Fill the Void, a piece about overcoming an eating disorder and finding peace and self-esteem through climbing by Shea Skinner, and a touching tribute to Royal Robbins by his daughter Tamara. And don't forget about the Too Soon Poetry, a deliciously awkward zine trademark. Plus the closing piece In Search of My Dirtbag Princess by Albert Kim. Sure to have the ladies searching after Albert while he crushes the cracks of Indian Creek wearing only silver sequin shorts. Volume 10, the Raw issue of the Climbing Zine, can be found at your local gear shop, bookstore, or climbing gym, or at www.climbingzine.com.
We gotta get
Listen, where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
a
big
house. We
place,
sold
that
it
side
out.
of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats?
You
We really should.
The hell are you doing? I couldn't sleep. I'm checking the ropes. There was a frayed end on your rope, and I'm cutting it out.
Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Clues. It is April 18th, about 9:30 here in Colorado. This is episode 127 of the Enormocast, a conversation with Erik Weihenmayer. Have you heard of Erik Weihenmayer? Blind guy, climbed Mount Everest. Turns out he also kayaked the Grand Canyon. Yeah, can't see a thing. Kayaked the Grand Canyon. Anyway, we'll get to that in just a minute. Things have been crazy here at Enormocast headquarters. Sick baby. Had a sick baby for a couple weeks. I know most of you single climbing dirtbag guys out there are like, who cares, Kalus? Get to the interview. Yeah, well, you haven't known dread till you've laid there wondering if that was your baby's last breath. Was that it? Seems kind of shallow. Nope, chest is rising again. Guess he's got one more in him. Nope, looks like he's got one more. Nope, still breathing. Yep, I think his chest moved again. Anyway, do that for 6 or 7 days. Yeah, you think climbing's hard? But anywho, he's back to normal. Back to his little self, his little pinner self. Definitely going to be a climber, this one. Super tiny. An ounce of fat on that little bag of bones. Okay, enough baby talk, huh? All right, well, 5 Point Film Festival is also coming up in a couple days, so that's been really busy. It'll be dead and gone by the time you get here to this podcast, but I'm sure it was a great time. Got a live podcast in a couple days and doing some MC work. The band's playing. It's going to be an incredibly busy weekend. Then it's off to Moab to guide some climbing. So that's what's going on here at the Enormocast headquarters. That's what's going on at the Enormocast headquarters. Do you care? Probably not that much. But you know what? This is my time. This is my time, the intro. Some people are like, you got to shorten the intro up, man. But this is my time to talk to my peoples. Yeah, you guys can skip it anyway. You know how that button works. All right, let's talk about Erik Weihenmayer. I got an opportunity to interview Erik through some of the people that work for him. And, it seemed a little intimidating because, this dude's been on Oprah. He's that big. He's been on Oprah. All right, Erik's blind. He is a climber, and he's climbed Mount Everest. He also has kayaked the Grand Canyon, has a new book out called No Barriers, about not just kayaking the Grand Canyon, but kind of his journey from a very angry teenager losing his sight to the place that he is now. Great book. Got it done before I interviewed him, and we talk a bit about it on the show. But, when I got this opportunity to interview Erik, I was kind of curious because, with the Everest thing, I'm always a little bit skeptical. Now, obviously, blind guy climbing Everest, incredible feat, very cool, can't take anything away from that. But I was curious about what kind of climber he really was. Some people tick that thing. It's sort of a feather in their cap, and the climbing is sort of secondary, or it's not really part of their lives beyond training for that and getting up there. So I was kind of curious, what is this guy all about when it comes to climbing? And you'll find out, like I did, that, dude's legit. He's legit. Now, of course, some people will sit there and say, well, why do you get to judge who's legit and who's not? Well, because I'm the Enormocast, and that's what I do. All right. But what I mean by that is he's not an incredibly awesome climber. He hasn't ticked any sort of hard grade. But the thing is he talks about it. He believes in it. It's a part of his life in a way that I think is really authentic and that informs who he is. And I think he believes that without it, he'd be a completely different person. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking at. I don't care how hard you climb. I want it to sort of, at least to a certain extent, permeate your existence. Then we can talk. You know what I'm saying? And then you just have to admire a man, a person who faces his fears like Erik does. I mean, just imagine getting in a kayak on a river, even if you're a really good kayaker, but then just close your eyes for the whole thing for days in that river. That is unreal. Anyway, that's who we're talking to today. Great guy, invited me into his home, hung out, met some of his family, met the folks that work for him who are just in love with the guy because he's so positive, so generous, and it was just a really great time being around him for a few hours. So I hope you guys enjoy being around him for an hour as well. And let's get to it. The conversation with Erik Weihenmayer. There's a long list of things that can cause you to fail on a climb. Fear, weak forearms. The moonshine the rando from Kentucky was passing around the fire last night. But you should never have to blame your shoes. And in a recent survey, podcast air quotes, Sportivas were the least likely shoe to be angrily whipped across a bouldering cave by that sweaty dude who thinks that blue V4 is totally V6. From legends like the Mira to the Spry Otaki, Sportiva designs and builds climbing shoes to be loved, cradled, and cherished, not slammed in the dirt at the base of your proj in disgust. So if you want love, not hate, get on the good foot by swiping right to Sportiva.com or your nearest climbing retailer to check out the little bundles of love for your feet. Sportiva is a proud sponsor of the Enormocast. Cool. Well, let's get started. Actually, I wanted to ask you, when someone like me, and I don't have any close friends who are blind or anything like that, are there terms or anything that anybody worries about? Is that one of those sorts of things where there's landmines to talk about it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
In fact, people use the word blind. I think that's perfectly acceptable. Mm-hmm. Sort of funny. People are too politically correct. They say, you're a person of sightlessness. What? No, I'm not. I'm blind. And then, as you remember in the book, Mark Wellman loves the word GIMP. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those words. I don't even know if people know what that word is anymore, but it's one of those words that I think you're given the license to say if you're disabled in some way, but for him it's like a badge of honor.
Right, yeah, and actually DiMartino, he's another one that throws that thing around, because that was the name of their film, the Gimp Monkeys, when they were climbing El Cap. But I get what you mean. It's a word that the community gets to use, and I think everybody else probably treads lightly on. Yeah,
exactly. I think wasn't it Paradox that had it was Ice Gemps or something like one of their...
exactly.
Yeah, and they had to change it because it just people weren't getting the joke.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I like it. I think it's
Okay.
funny. In fact, the first time Mark ever said it was on the climb we did of Ancient together, and I was like, what does that even mean? And he explained his whole philosophy behind it.
Well, cool. I just wanted to sort of talk about that because I'm sure you're used to dealing with folks that are a little bit touchy around the subject. And,
Yeah.
And, having read the book, I just felt like you actually had talked a bit about that in there with Mark and thrown the different terms around. But
Yeah, nothing offends me.
Okay. Well, we'll see about that. No. Just
Nice.
kidding. But and you weren't born blind. It happened to you about what age?
I went blind over time, so I was born legally blind.
Okay.
Meaning, that's like a legal term they use. From 20 feet, I could see what a normal person saw from 200 feet. So I was legally blind, but I could still see it well enough to play basketball and try to play baseball, run around the woods, running into trees, jumping off things. And my sight got worse and worse by the time I was... I think it was a week before my freshman year is when I lost the last bits of sight, and I couldn't see well enough to take a step anymore. And that's okay, now I'm actually blind. This is sort of freaking scary.
Yeah, it must have been terrifying.
It was scary because, before that, I could always tell myself that it wasn't really true. And, the brain is really powerful, if you want to just deny something, the brain can easily do it. You just make stuff up in your brain, whatever you want to believe. I didn't eat my Cheerios this morning, so that's why I'm not seeing like I did yesterday, or there's suns in my eyes, or I don't know, your brain can make up anything. And so, yeah, even though the doctor said, hey, there's no cure for this, you will be blind by an early teenager, I just blocked it out. And so when I actually went blind and I couldn't take a step, it was like getting hit in the head with a baseball bat. You're like, oh my God, what is this? It's like a door closing.
So you're kind of in this world of denial as this kid who's losing his sight. You're telling me that you're playing games with your brain to try to make... Is your family trying to prepare you? Are you preparing in any way, or were you just kind of trying to cope until the last minute?
You're just trying to cope. You're just totally in denial. And my parents, they were gently trying to prod me to understand, like, hey, this is going to happen. And brothers, my brothers and my sister and teachers, and all I did was just like reject them. Like my teacher, they brought in a teacher to try to teach me Braille, and I was like, I'm not blind. Like, in my mind, I was like, how dare you even think that I'm blind? Like, I don't want to be blind, so I'm not going to learn these stupid things that blind people learn. So I would just fight. I would lash out and try to destroy all the people that tried to give me help.
Oh, sure.
And I hope I'm not an a-hole for doing that, but I was an a-hole for doing that.
Well, I was just about to say that before you said that was that, that was your reason and a very legitimate reason to be lashing out. But, there's plenty of 8th grade boys that lash out for a billion different reasons. So, it was sort of a perfect storm of hitting you right in this time where, any teenage boy at that point is in sort of turmoil about the world and their place in it. And you've got this extra, 50-ton weight that falls down on you. So,
and they told me to use a cane too. And that's the other thing. I didn't want to use a cane because I was like, that's a symbol of blindness. So I would step on my canes and bend them, and I would throw them down sewer gratings, and I would use them like my teacher, my cane teacher would say, quit using your cane like a hiking pole. So I'd be just purposely using it incorrectly.
Right. Well, that might have been prophetic, though.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a little bit of prophecy of the future world. So when I was reading about that and your transition into this, and as a former high school teacher, again, thinking about just the weight of the world that's on a kid at that age, who can just be an average kid that has angst, but the threat of being different, the threat of being singled out is sort of terminally scary for a lot of kids who have no really outward problems. So I kind of was thinking about you as moving into this, freshman in high school, and you've got to have this cane and all these things that sort of single you out. Must have been somewhat devastating.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, like every kid feels a little bit alienated, and I felt like I was really alienated. Like, you're like sort of like in Connecticut where I grew up, there were a lot of raccoons, and they'd get into your house, and sometimes you'd like come in and you'd corner them, and they'd be eating your trash, and they'd lash out at you, and that's pretty much me. I'm that raccoon lashing out, trying to claw the world. Mm-hmm. And the second thing, I feel like I'm the only person here. Like the rest of the world is across this expanse, and because I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me. To me, that was the ultimate. I'd rather like close up and hide in a little dark place and then let people think that they should have pity on me, because that was just humiliating to me. I guess it was pride, but I didn't want what I think the way I described it was in the book was you're like an egg and you've cracked in the hallway, and there's this gooey egg and it's kind of gross and everyone's stepping around it and they don't know quite how to deal with it. And so, I felt like that egg, like I was cracked, and I was just, I didn't want to be a beggar accepting help, although I needed help. So it was like this sort of crazy paradox. Mm-hmm. And, the other thing probably that happened was that, because I lost so much sight and finally went totally blind, in my mind, I started worrying that, you get this sort of doom mindset where you think life is just a series of losing little bits of life and little bits of life until you're down to nothing, So it's a lot that you have to fight out of psychologically too.
So let's talk about that fight, because obviously we're sitting here. You made it through those years. And this is a climbing podcast, which sometimes almost becomes a joke a little bit, because I keep saying that and we keep talking about other stuff, which is totally fine. But I do want to get to that, because obviously the outdoors climbing adventure became some sort of anchor for you. Yeah. But what can you point to any other sort of transitional moments in these years when you were the raccoon, you were fighting, you were lashing out, things that happened or things you found or moments that started you on this path to this guy now who I'm sitting in front of?
Well, a lot of the things I learned, unfortunately, I wish I was like this genius who could have epiphanies and just make these big leaps, but a lot of the things I learned are from just sort of flailing and bleeding my way forward. Mm-hmm. And so I was walking down a dock. I wasn't using my cane properly, and it was at a time where I could see sort of double, like, and I still remember the sight in my mind of, I could see the sort of wood rows of the dock in front of me, and I could see them, maybe they went left, maybe they went right. I wasn't sure. The sun was kind of in my face, and I just said, okay, and I took a step, and I went, oh crap, wrong choice, and I flipped off the dock. I did a flip in the air, and I landed on my back on the deck of a boat, and and then I tried to climb back up on the dock, and I had tons of splinters, like hundreds of splinters all down my arm and stuff, and I thought, my God, you are so lucky. You could have literally just broken your neck there. Like, that would have been game over. So I realized, it kind of was like being beat into submission. Mm-hmm. You realize there are these things that you cannot fight. It was my first lesson that there are things that are bigger than you. You can't fight that thing, but you can also maybe influence other things in that world, and you can sort of push the parameters of your life, but you have to sort of give in to that basic thing that's bigger than you. And so for me, it was like learning how to use a cane. That was the very first time I said, okay, this is what I got to do. And I found that, like, okay, reluctantly I'm using this thing, and I'm not smashing into walls, I'm not falling off of docks. I'm walking down the hallway with my friends, talking, telling jokes and dirty jokes and having a great time. I'm using my cane. They're walking with their eyes, but it's achieving the same thing. So when I got this letter in Braille of a group taking blind kids rock climbing through this program for the blind, I thought, yeah, I'm going to say yes to this, because I have no idea whether I can climb. I mean, it sounds sort of preposterous, but it's how you'd stick yourself to the face of, like, I remember Connecticut, there's not any climbing really too much, a little bit. And I ran my hand up the wall of my room, and I thought, this is crazy, like stupid. Who would take a blind kid rock climbing? And I signed up right away. I was so psyched, and I loved it.
Wait, did you sign up to maybe possibly like prove them wrong that like taking blind kids climbing was a stupid idea?
They were taking blind kids rock climbing for the first time because they thought it was really cool.
Okay, it sounded a little bit maybe you were like, well, they're wrong about this, and I'm going to prove it.
No way. I wanted to I had no idea. But I did think it was stupid and preposterous. How would you ever get yourself to stick to the side of a rock face? And I can't even see, but I had this sliver of kind of openness. I didn't want that door to be closed. Mm-hmm. It wasn't proving them wrong. They were proving me wrong. You know?
Well, that was one of the questions I had. I was going to, say, what made you think you could become a rock climber? And that, I phrased it like that because I thought, well, that's the question is what part of you said, even if it was preposterous, I've done this, and this is another step that I can possibly do. But there sounds like it was just a very small voice in your head telling you that.
It is a small voice, and I'll tell you, you always hear in these popular movies and stuff, don't be motivated by fear. And I'll tell you, there was a lot of fear going in my brain at that time because I remember being led into school for the first time and being led to the cafeteria, and I didn't know how to use a cane yet, and I sat in the cafeteria, at a table by myself, listening to all the action, all the excitement, like food fights, food flying by, and people joking and having so much fun out there. And I'm sitting at this table by myself, poor little blind guy, and it was like I felt like I was in prison, and I thought, that's the real fear. Sure, there's a little fear of not being able to see with your eyes anymore, but the real fear was living in this sort of semi-self-created prison. Mm-hmm. That was fear in your core. So for me, rock climbing was that little sliver of this is the opposite of sitting in the cafeteria. Mm-hmm. This is where the action is.
Like you can literally get out of the walls.
Exactly.
You can climb out of the prison, so to speak.
You can climb out of the prison.
So what did that day look like?
Well, I was an athletic little kid. I was like 120 pounds at the time. And I wrestled. The wrestling was another outlet for me, which I was just discovering at the time. But rock climbing was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was so incredible, like feeling my way up the rock face and feeling all these textures and patterns in the rock. And I know I couldn't use my eyes, but I could use my hands and my feet as my eyes, and I could problem solve my way up the face. Kind of, looking at the patterns of the rock and trying to predict what was beyond the reach of my hand, and trying to connect the dots, like point A to point B to point C, and how do you get your body to go from point A to point B to point C, and then trying to do all these crazy angles and leverages and weird body positions that enable you to sort of unlock the puzzle in the rock. Mm-hmm. To me, that was just full-on adventure. It was so adventuresome. I loved every second of it. Left a lot of blood and skin on the rock, but I loved every second of it because it was so engaging. And it was our first climb that I did was on Cathedral Ledge in New Hampshire. And I remember we got up to the top of the first pitch, and I'm sure it was like a really easy climb, but it was so fun for me sitting up there on the ledge, and I was just over tree line, so I could hear the sound of space. So blind people use sound vibrations to kind of get information. Sound vibrations moving out, bouncing off of objects and coming back at you. And I could hear the sound of space kind of moving out over the valley. And I could hear the trees just below me. And it must have been fall because I could hear the wind, the leaves like blowing off the trees in that kind of crinkly way. And I think, they must have been building a hotel or something way off in the distance. So I could hear a chainsaw, which was giving me more sound vibration to work off of. I could hear the whole scope of the valley below me. And I just thought, this is adventure. This is it for me. This is, and they had taken us canoeing and sailing. All those are fun. Sailing was a little bit intricate with all the ropes and everything. Mm-hmm. Tandem biking was fun, a little repetitive. Canoeing was okay, but rock climbing, it met every definition of my sense of adventure.
Oh, right on. And how old were you about? Do you remember?
I was 16.
You were 16, so sophomore. junior year, kind of in high school. You know, you got through high school, you survived. Can you describe the person you were, you know, like we just did? You were walking in as a freshman super scared, to the kid who graduated, the kid who walked out of high school?
Well, I went rock climbing a few more times that in high school. There weren't like really rock gyms and stuff at that time in the 80s. But I did go up to New Hampshire a few more times and climb with this great guy named Mark Chauvin and a guy named Nick Yardley. They were the first guys on that first climbing session with the blind kids at the Carroll Center for the Blind. So those were great mentors to me. And I climbed with this guy. His name was Mark Chauvin, and he was a great mentor. He had really stinky feet. He still climbs. So he was a perfect like representative of climbing, really smelly feet. And then he said, hey, biggest thing I can teach you is if you drop someone's piece of gear while you're cleaning the gear, you got to pay for it.
Right.
That was the first thing I ever learned. And then the second thing he taught me was, he said, I'm honored by the way that you trust me, but you shouldn't trust people. You want to push yourself and get as independent as you possibly can. So check my anchors, check my harness. You know, make sure that you're not just blindly trusting the people. And I'm honored that you're trusting me, but don't do it. And that was great advice too. That saved my life a few times. But anyway, so yeah, I started climbing, although not enough. And I also joined the wrestling team, and that was great because I was part of a team. And I think people crave to want to be part of things that are kind of bigger than them. And so for me as a boy wrestling, the team didn't baby me or treat me different. They pounded my head and my face into the mat just like every other kid. And I love that. That was to me just the greatest thing, my first experience with a team. And it's funny how wrestling connects to climbing. I've met a lot of ex-wrestlers who are climbers. When you're groveling up a chimney or something and it's like flying in your face and your hands are all cut and blood's flying everywhere, you go, what a wrestling match. Right. So wrestling was a great prep for climbing.
So I guess we're on this little arc of your climbing. You graduated high school. What was next for you in terms of the outdoors, but also just in life?
Well, I went on to BC, Boston College. I lived in Cambridge for a couple years. I loved that area because it was very accessible. I could ride the T, the trolley. The colleges had these great accessibility rooms where you could use computers and all kinds of things that talked and printed things out in Braille. So it was a very accessible place. And I got a master's degree in education, and I wanted to be a middle school teacher. And I went on a job fair with my guide dog to New York City, and it was a conference that were hiring teachers all around the country. And I had been a little bit bored, in Boston. Like, I remember one night, it was a Friday night, and I was playing Braille Scrabble with this friend of mine. She's blind as well. And the window was open because it was kind of a hot night, and I could hear people all outside, like going to restaurants and bars and having fun outside. And I was inside playing Braille Scrabble, and I thought, okay, this feels a little bit like being in the cafeteria again. And I want to get out. I want to branch out. And so I went on this job fair with my guide dog, and a lot of schools thought a blind person could never be a teacher. Like, they even say straight up, I like what you do. I like your resume. You have good grades, but we could never convince our board to trust you, a blind person, with our kids. So I got a lot of rejections, but I also got a few people who took notice, and I got this job out in Arizona. And that is far from playing Braille Scrabble as I could possibly go. So I found myself on a bus heading out to the desert. I didn't know anyone except one friend out there, and got a middle school teaching job. And for the next 6 years, I just climbed every weekend. I joined the Arizona Mountaineering Club. One of the substitutes at the school was a climber, and so we were just out in the desert climbing, and Arizona's just full of rocks.
So you're just a full-on rock rat, addicted to climbing kind of guy in this time.
Completely.
Right.
In fact, what's funny is the guy that I started climbing with, his name's Sam Bridgham. He's still a friend. And he had attention deficit disorder. So we were out climbing together. And, I don't really know when I'm pushing my envelope here how to find the holds. I hadn't really learned to scan my hands in the right way, in a perfect way. And he's like, I'll just tell you. So I'll just say left hand, up a foot, left a foot, So I got into the situation. I was on some kind of roof, and I was like, Sam, where's the next hold? And he said, your left hand, up 1 foot, And I reached up, and I kind of like flailed up with like my last bit of strength. I was on a top rope, so it wasn't a big deal. But he's like, oh, I meant right hand.
Right.
So I didn't worry about these perfect partnerships. It was a guy who couldn't see and a guy who couldn't concentrate and got his lefts and rights mixed up. We were the perfect team.
Yeah, right.
And I love that. He was the greatest guy in the world because, like nobody else, he would stop in the outdoors and he would describe these beautiful, beautiful things that he was seeing, like sunsets and rock faces. And so I got to know a lot of the desert through his eyes.
I actually, I hadn't mentioned this yet, but I actually guided Colorado Mountain School for years, and we worked with blind climbers as well.
Yeah.
And that reminded me because I'm a little bit bad with the left-right thing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a huge deal because, again, these folks were on top rope, and a lot of the folks we took it was a first-time kind of thing, people who were working on their skills, and but it involved a lot of me apologizing all day long, to the point where at the end of the day, usually everybody laughed it off as, yeah, Kalous is not the best at telling us where to put our hands. Gotta be left. No, I mean right. No, I mean left. No, left. Yeah, so.
Well, I actually got to volunteer to work with the Colorado School for the Blind with that program, I think, for a while, for a couple years. Yeah, Bruce Andrews was just the greatest guy.
Yeah.
And he said, he knew I didn't have that many climbing partners in town. And so he said, hey, come and volunteer with these blind folks, and then I'll hook you up with some guides. So when I just moved to Colorado in 1997, he hooked me up with these great guides that I learned around my way around El Dorado Canyon. So that was great.
Yeah, actually, we would have sort of almost crossed paths because I worked for Bruce for a little while too. Let me ask you a bit about rock climbing, since we can get into the nitty gritty on this podcast, because climbers are listening. What does it look like for you in terms of going rock climbing? Are you leading? Are you choosing routes? Are you always top roping? What is it? I think people are probably curious about if your climbing looks the same as everybody else's, or obviously it doesn't quite, but...
I've never been like a hard climber. You know, I like to climb 10s and 11s, and
that's hard enough.
Yeah, it's hard enough for me. I love classic routes. I love beautiful routes that are long. I love adventure. So I like sport climbing. It's really fun for me. I love it. I mean, but if you ask me what jazzes me the most, it's these long, beautiful routes. Like I climbed the East Buttress of El Cap last fall, which was just heaven. I love that. Where you're just pushing yourself, and then there's a big descent as well. It's just a big day of adventure. But I do a little of everything. I mean, I do like sport climbing. I do lead. I probably do more top roping, but if I find something that I like, I'll go lead it. If I haven't climbed it before, instead of on-sighting, my friends call it non-sighting, and I've led some things in El Dorado, like the Wind Tower and the Bastille and things like that. And so just like I love leading. I love placing gear. If I'm gonna trad lead, I do like to climb it first, so I can kind of memorize where the placements are. So yeah, I continue to do that, and led a little bit in Yosemite when I was there last fall. But a lot of the days where we're just like moving fast up a long route, which I love to do. For me, I think, okay, I could lead, which maybe I'll lead a pitch or two, but for me, it's really more about just be efficient. Like, don't be the guy who's like dragging everyone down and slowing them down. So just, learn how to climb on a top rope and move fast as a blind person, like efficiently, be able to take gear out quickly, like don't hold up the team. And don't be a sack of potatoes that's holding everyone back.
Right. So let's move on to talking about mountaineering as well. And when did that kind of come into the picture as a pursuit that eventually put you on top of Everest?
Well, I was climbing in the desert in Arizona with that friend of mine, Sam Bridgham, and we were climbing something. I think it was a route in Lunar Land in Queen Creek, outside of Phoenix, and it was called Ride the Wild, and I was leading it. It was a sport climb. It was really fun, and then I brought Sam up, and then we were on the top of this tower, and he said, "You're getting pretty good." He's like, "We should try something bigger." And so in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, like what? Like go down to Tucson and climb something taller, like Mount Lemmon or something? And he said, how about Mount McKinley or Denali? And I was like, isn't that like a big snowy mountain in Alaska? Isn't that about as far from rock climbing in the desert as you could possibly be? So a lot of these adventures happen like that for me. Like somebody just plants the seed, and it just opens the sliver of that door open a little bit more. And at first I go, stupid, like I did when I got that letter in Braille when I was 16. But the other part of me goes, that's kind of cool. Like, really? Like, could that be done? Probably a lot of people can relate to that. When I did the Leadville 100 mountain bike ride, it was me and a friend at a garage party drinking beers, and he's like, let's do Leadville. Yeah, let's do it. You wake up the next morning slightly hungover and go, what?
Right.
So that's the way it was with Denali. I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then it was a year and a half of training, getting ready for this mountain. And it kind of taps into this thing I think about a lot now. And I guess I call it metacognition, which is like kind of accepting and knowing what you don't know. And I knew I was clueless in the mountaineering world. So how do I go on the fast track to learning everything I want to learn and be okay with that? Like be vulnerable and be okay with that. And I found lots of people in the Arizona Mountaineering Club took us under their wing and taught us tons of stuff about crevasse rescue and just how to move on snow and ice axes and stuff, how to rope up, and then found a lot of great mentors, and we worked with a guide, Craig Van Hoy, who we tried to go up Rainier and Mount Hood and things like that in the winter as we were getting started, and just learning a ton. I don't think we summited anything, but I learned a lot, and by the time it was June, ready to head to Denali, me and Sam and our several other partners, like we were ready. So that was cool. And by the way, one of the things we planned to do was Sam's idea. Again, not a very linear thinking person. He said, let's go climb Longs Peak. That'll be good training. And we'll do it in January.
Right.
Like, well, okay. So I go to Colorado. It's like 100-mile-an-hour winds. We didn't even get close to the summit. I think we got a little higher than the boulder field before we just got hammered by wind backwards and came down. And I remember I'd lost my goggles, so my eyelids were frozen together as we climbed our way, as we hiked down the mountain, and we were getting picked up and slammed around on the by the wind. And Sam lost a snowshoe, meaning we weren't very organized,
right.
And he was limping on one snowshoe, like, a long way out in deep snow. And I remember getting to the parking lot, my eyelids were frozen together, which isn't a big deal. Like, I don't see out of my eyes, but it's still kind of weird, like thawing out my eyelids. Dummy didn't wear his goggles.
Sure.
And I loved that because I was like, Sam, I think we're ready.
Right.
We're a junk show, but we're ready, And it was that moment where you kind of like you're standing on the beach and you've like tipped one toe into the water, and you're just you need that catalyst to say, I think I'm ready. And so Longs Peak was that for us.
Well, it could have very well been the worse weather than anything you experienced on your actual Denali climb, other than that.
Totally was.
I mean, that place is insane, like in the wintertime.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was insane.
Yeah,
I remember just being picked up and slammed down into the snow.
I had a friend because I tried to solo the Diamond in winter, one idiotic winter, and just kept putting ropes on it and stuff, and a friend from Denver who had guided on Macaloo and all these other places, and he said, the worst weather I've ever seen is on Longs Peak in the winter. Of all the things I've ever done, like it's super gnarly up there. So when you said Longs Peak, I was like, I bet he's gonna have a story about horrible wind.
It was.
Yeah. So the Denali climb went all right?
It went all right, and cool. Tons of suffering. Like, it definitely notched me up in terms of what the human mind and body could endure suffering-wise. wrestling, nothing had ever quite prepared me. So there were days I'd get to my tent and I'd just be almost in tears. Like one day I remember climbing up to high camp and then coming back down, because we cached gear and the trail, you don't want to step too far off the trail because of crevasses, but everybody was walking and they were stepping in these frozen boot holes. I couldn't see the holes and I just kept slipping and sliding into these deep holes and like wrenching my shins and just slipping and sliding. Blisters were popping open on my feet and I was just so utterly, completely crushed, and just got into my tent and was like, I don't know if this life is for me, like I don't think I'm tough enough for this. But, the other side of you is, wants to just kind of like take a nap and wake up and have a new day before you. So we actually, believe it or not, Summit Day was easier than the other days because I didn't have a big pack on and there weren't boot holes and I could just step my way forward up this nice hard snow. And we summited and we found out later it was Helen Keller's birthday. It was June 27th. It was pretty crazy.
That's rad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it didn't, you just said it crushed you like day after day, but it obviously didn't crush you enough to not want to keep doing it.
Yeah, because everybody knows who climbs knows that, like, you come back and you're just like the pack crushing your internal organs and you're like all hunched over and you're windburn on top of sunburn on top of windburn. My brothers met me at base camp. They flew into the Kahiltna Glacier and my dad and my wife, and they said, look, it's a Sasquatch coming. Right. So I'm sure I looked pretty gross, very crusty, but you forget all that
right
immediately. And like after you take your week-long nap, you wake up and you're just thinking about the next thing. It's very addicting.
Mm-hmm. So when you talked a minute about climbing East Butte on El Cap, this idea of like, I want to be the most efficient partner I can. I don't want to be a sack of potatoes. I often ask this of especially of mountaineers, people who go into the Alpine, and maybe you have an interesting perspective on it. But, for all the things that maybe you have to rely on other partners for, what do you think you personally sort of bring to the table as a partner when you go on these expeditions that may be unique, or you obviously continue to find people who want to be involved in your adventures. Your book, just was this list after list of these great people who wanted to be involved in what you're doing. So something's got to bring them to the table. What do you think it is?
Well, one, you like people, right? And people like you. And they like you because beyond climbing, they like you because they like hanging out with you. You just have things in common, and hopefully, and I've had friends tell me like they appreciate my gratitude and like sort of like my approach to life. So you just want to be together, and that draws you in, and once you find your climbing partners in that way. Mm-hmm. And then the key is, what can I contribute? So can we go out and have a big day out climbing and having fun and laughing and sweating and suffering and bleeding together? And this blind guy isn't going to like drag him down or do something unsafe or draw us into a helicopter rescue or something. So there's just honestly that too, like just being able to contribute efficiently to the team moving forward up the mountain. That I think is understated for most people. I may not, my idea of leadership, and you have to think about this when you're blind a lot more maybe, is that I don't have to be the fastest person. I'm not going to be the fastest person. But I do want to be efficient, and I do want to be able to do as much as I can independently. I want to be able to cook on a stove, boil the water one night. I want to be able to set up the tent and be able to do that and not be like standing there while everyone else sets up the tent. Mm-hmm. I want to
that's cold anyway.
Yeah.
Just standing there.
Yeah, exactly. Or like the other day, I was outside of Quebec. We were climbing a frozen waterfall called La Pomme d'Or, and my friend's outside shoveling some snow for water, and I said, let me lay out your sleeping bag and blow up your air mattress. Just something. Like you want to contribute to some way. So that's sort of my model of leadership, is contribute in some way. to the team just moving forward, and then be grateful, and don't be a sack of potatoes.
Right. Kind of comes down to it. That's good advice, I think, across the board. No, that'll be the name of your next book.
Yeah.
Don't be a sack of potatoes. So, okay, cool. So in this progression, you're saying how any adventure, you come up with it on the spur of a moment, and it starts to kind of feed into your brain, and maybe that is possible, and things come up. But there is this progression towards kind of bigger things, and you ended up climbing Everest, writing a book about it. You were the first blind person to summit Everest, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The only one so far.
Only one.
But few have tried, though, and
Okay.
they probably will.
All right. I always read the first, so I assumed there had been a second. So
Yeah. No second yet.
no second yet. So do you think that's are you someone who's trying to top yourself, or are these just these crazy adventures that pop up and you're just the kind of guy that just doesn't say no? Or are there things that you've said no to and said, no, I think that either we'll put it on the back burner for now or do something else?
I think probably all the above,
Okay.
right, are probably true. How you take the things that you want to do, like how you choose them, because you can't do everything. Yeah, I do have trouble saying no. That is true.
Does your wife say stuff like that to you?
Yeah. I get excited by things. I'm very impressionable. I get carried away with ideas. And I guess I'm not trying to top myself, although maybe I am sometimes. I remember there was this climb in Arizona. I can't remember, but I was with the Arizona Mountaineering Club, and this lady went up and tried to lead the climb, and it was a trad climb, and she wasn't wearing a helmet. It was really dumb, and she fell at this crux, and she went flying off and smacked her head on the rock. Blood kind of splattered on my arm, I remember. She was rushed off to the hospital. And somebody's like, well, certainly you're not going to lead that. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, oh, yeah? And then I went up and led it. And the section she fell on, I almost fell, but I got a piece in and I somehow made it through. And I thought, you are such an idiot, because you're doing things like reacting to the way the world is reacting to you. That's as reactionary as the world is. Like, don't be a reactor. Like, don't just be doing things to prove that you can do this or that. Like, eventually that may kill you. So I'm very careful. Like, I try to make sure I stop that thing in me that wants to go prove that blind people can do this or that, because that's kind of ultimately a shallow way to climb. It's a shallow reason to climb. And so I really try to be motivated by joy and excitement and adventure, and just like what's exciting out there and what's going to help me grow as a person, and evolve in some cool way, and maybe make some new discoveries, or maybe come home with some new gifts of life, and what kind of team are there, people that I want to climb with, and what are their ideas. So I try to keep it positive and not be like, I'm going to try to do the harder and harder things, because I think that leads to, one, maybe injury or death, and I also think that leads to a sense of unfulfillment.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But Everest was one of those things that intrigued me, because of course there are a lot of naysayers who said, you're going to go kill yourself, and yeah, let's fire you up for sure, you know. But the people I climbed with at the time, who I'd been on, you go on this 20-hour epic adventure, and you're just trudging through the snow, and those people turn to you and they say, you can do this. Like, you're as strong as anyone there. In fact, you're stronger than most people to go to Everest, and
sure.
And you're more qualified than 90% of the people on that mountain. And so I think it was partly choosing to listen to the right people, and then like somehow letting the critics or the naysayers sort of letting go and just saying, I choose not to believe those people.
And so when it all was said and done, was it as hard? Was it harder? Did it sort of meet your expectations in terms of the adventure that you were on?
It did. It was epically hard and adventuresome. I remember just the Khumbu Icefall, for instance, a lot of people talk about, where a lot of the risk happens on the mountain, sort of all climbers out there, but I mean, like, it's the place where the glacier's running down the mountain and it sort of drops off a cliff and then kind of explodes down the mountain like a river of ice, and, you know, moves and shifts, and it doesn't meet Americans with Disability Act standards. So,
for all the sort of poo-pooing on Everest, it's serious business in there.
You don't want to be in the icefall that long, because you're trying to move quickly through it. And maybe like the average time, I could be getting this slightly off, but it's like maybe 7, 8 hours the first time. I took 13 hours, and I knew that was too slow. I was endangering my whole team, you know, by being in the icefall too long. And so I had to speed up, and I had to figure out how to navigate that kind of impossibly blind, unfriendly terrain faster. And the way I did it was I learned, you know, one, you sort of map the route a little bit. You map the sections, like the little crevasses that you're zigzagging across snow bridges. You kind of map the zigzags. You get faster on the ladders. I learned to lock my crampon points over the rungs and lock down and know whether there's a good step. You stop hesitating, like when you're having to jump across little crevasses. You just, you know, my friends tap where they want me to land, and I just jump and land in those boot marks. You know, my friends started doing things like the right fixed lines. They put their hand on the right line, and I just feel their hand, and I'd clip my cow's tail into the right rope. So there were just all these little tiny efficiency things that we started implementing and getting faster and more efficient. And obviously you get stronger as well as you acclimatize. And my last time up the icefall, I broke 5 hours. I was really, really proud.
So you went from 13 to 5.
Yeah.
Oh, sick.
So I went from
you
pretty
must
desperately
be, like,
slow to average
through there. Yeah, but still, I mean,
I'll be an average sighted person. I'm fine with that. Yeah, I felt like I was booking.
Yeah.
In fact, we went up to Camp 2 in one day, and nothing was as hard as the icefall, the rest of the mountain. In fact, summit day, I'd had bad days on mountains. I'd had tough days, like Aconcagua. I remember I hadn't been sleeping. I had glaucoma in my eyes, and that creates really high pressure in your eyeballs. So when I climbed Aconcagua, it was like somebody had jabbed a fork in my eye. I was just like so in pain. I couldn't sleep, and I thought that was the end of my climbing career. So when I summited that mountain, I hadn't been sleeping, I hadn't been acclimatizing. My eye felt like I was just, you know, I couldn't think of anything else except how bad my eye hurt. And I just remember just being crushed, perceiving the world through a straw. My teammate would say, turn left, or go left, and I go, I think you said left, you know, and just remember that being a really hard day and getting down and just puking my guts out at high camp. But Everest, on the other hand, I had a great day, and I summited. I remember being so strong, feeling so good at 29,000 feet. You know, people said, you know, you have to think up there. You know, your brain kind of gets a little reptilian, and you. So I thought being blind and not being able to think, that's like a big problem in the death zone.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I could think. And I wasn't like on crazy amounts of oxygen or anything. I was just on like the normal amount of oxygen that people use, like 2 liters, and getting down and just feeling strong and being so psyched that I had this great team around me. 19 of us reached the summit that day. And by the way, none of these people were like paid. I didn't hire guides or anything like that, which I have done before. It's all great, but these were all friends. And people said we'd have a disaster up there, and instead 19 out of 21 reached the summit. At the time, it was the most people to reach the summit of Everest in a single day. Most of us stood on top at the same time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you wrote what it's called Touch the Top of the World.
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah. And that was cool, you know, like I had great friends, you know. That's I think maybe. I mean, I love the outdoors. I love the view. You know, I can't see the view with my eyes, but I can feel it through my hands, and I can hear it. I can sense it. But I will say that's the amazing part, just being with friends. And, you know, I'm not, I don't do too many things solo as a blind person. I don't ski solo. I don't kayak solo. Like, I always have guides. Although I do run with my dog up on the mesa behind my house. That's one of the few things we do. But even that, I'm with my dog.
Right.
So yeah, but I think I like that component of the outdoors.
Mm-hmm. You're something of an evangelical for climbing and sort of its, I don't know, its intrinsic benefits. I know you've brought other blind kids climbing. That's in your book, No Barriers, Climbing in Tibet. I am too. I'm an evangelical for its mystical properties, whatever, or its mythical properties, whatever it happens to be, that makes it so amazing.
Yes.
But if you were pitching it as the thing that's been so important to you to other blind people, as something to try, as something to get into, and what do you think would be your pitch? I mean, what are you telling them in terms of what it does?
By the way, let alone blind people.
Yeah.
I've brought every walk of life into the mountains.
Okay.
From kids who are poor, to kids with learning disabilities, to kids with cognitive challenges, to people who can barely move a muscle, to people with full heart transplants, to people who with obesity, to people who have had tons of strokes. It's like a great unifier, the outdoors. So it's really cool. And I love people, like, they surf and they go, oh, surfing is like the way to transform. And it's like, well, I love golf. Golf is the way to transform. No, it could be any of these things. It could be any of these things. It's whatever the
Don't say that, sir. It's special. It's not the same.
It is whatever the catalyst may be, but the outdoors is the secret.
Right.
It's the outdoors. It's the greatest laboratory, to sort of think about your potential and to kind of go through a process, a journey, whatever that journey looks like, sometimes to rebuild. And whatever it is, and I don't want to move into the cheesy, but I do think it's a spiritual thing. I used to avoid that topic, but I do think there's a spiritual sense to the outdoors, because it makes you feel like you're part of something. And it kind of like, you have those days where you get crushed and you kind of get rebuilt in a way, and then and I guess as we get older, like you get stripped, you build up crust, and the outdoors psychological crust and a little physical crust, by the way.
No, I know about crust.
Yeah
That's why I'm laughing.
We get a little crusty. I'm a little crusty these days, but you go into the outdoors, you can't lie, you can't cheat, you can't fake it, you can't pretend, you can't have a big ego. You get crushed, and it kind of opens you up to whatever that is inside that's sort of like core, and it sort of makes you feel connected. There's no longer like crust between you and the world. And I love that. That's to me what I love. I come home sort of refreshed somehow. And I think that's for people, like, especially who have been injured or are protecting themselves and are trying to rebuild their lives. The brain is a great sort of neuroplasticity kind of experiment where you can like reprogram the brain, and you can have this great new journey that sets you in a new trajectory.
I want to ask you, before we get done here, because your book that I just read, that you've just finished, you said spent a year getting fat and writing. No Barriers, really the kind of piece it revolves around is you kayaking the Grand Canyon. And it's a running sort of thing on the show occasionally that, aside from ice climbing, which I have this sort of hate. It's not love-hate, it's like I can handle it and hate it relationship. Kayaking for me is the thing that I probably don't need to bother with. And so it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating because it's so different from climbing, in my mind, in the sense that it's a dynamic medium. Rocks don't usually move on you. It's fast, while I think climbing is incredibly slow. Just just watch it for a few minutes, nothing happens. So let's talk a little bit about kayaking. What made you, again, as a framing question, made you think you could be a kayaker? And also, some of those differences in what that challenge brings that climbing doesn't, or maybe some of the similarities.
Yeah, the way you talk about it, I think I agree. That's like, sort of maybe the antithesis of climbing in certain ways, but it has a little bit of overlap. But
sure, it's an
climbing,
adventurous sport. I mean,
but you're right. It's so different, and like that's the thing. I thought like, okay, like climbing's going to prepare me for these, other adventures, right? And it didn't. It was like it kind of laid me out.
See, I'm right.
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not doing it. Thank you for confirming that.
Climbing is nice and slow. It works
Right.
for my nice German brain of like being methodical and careful and cautious and laying it out there from time to time, but not laying it out there all the time. And then kayaking was like fast and furious. And I think the mountains are big in that way where you can't conquer a mountain. It's bigger than you, and you just kind of sneak to the summit while the mountain takes a little nap or something, and then you get the heck out of there. Kayaking, maybe in that way, is a little bit like that, where it's a force that's bigger than you. And so you're not like taking this situation and trying to bring it totally under control. You're trying to control some of it, but some of it you can't control. It's like riding this massive energy force that's bigger than you. And in a way, that became part of the theme of the book. Like, that was one of my things that I was struggling with. How do you confront these forces like a river that are so big? And in a way, it's not about asserting control. It's about letting go a little bit and trying to just ride these forces, knowing that you're not really in charge totally. So it was great. And for me, the way it got started was I was guiding a group of blind people down the Grand Canyon. I was one of their leaders, and we just did the first half. We hiked out at Phantom Ranch, and one of the guys on that trip was this amazing guy, Harlan Tanny. He was the kayaking safety guide. He's speeding around in the river, getting to the spots where people needed help. And they were, I was ducking, and a lot of the kids were like on rubber duckies, and we were chesting out some of the baby rapids. But at the end of that adventure, he said, "Hey, you should learn to hard shell kayak, and I'll come back and I'll take you down the whole river." And it was like same thing as always, just like my brain went,
stupid.
"Yeah, right, that's the stupidest idea." And then it was like another little wedge and just opened up, and I thought, I wonder if is that even possible? And Rob Raker, who was one of my climbing partners, we were climbing Losar in the Himalayas, this beautiful ice face, and we'd gotten down after this long day, and and as a climber, you're dreaming of everything but climbing, and I remember our teammate PV, who was our team leader on Everest, saying, "The worst day on the river is better than the best day on the mountains." Now, I know that's very subjective, but what he's talking about is like it's sun, and you can bring food and beer, and you don't have to carry everything on your back. And,
Sure.
you can take baths in the river. Anyway, so I said, "Hey, would you teach me how to roll?" And he said, "Oh yeah." And 2 hours into it, he taught me how to roll. And then I said, "Hey, how about I want to try maybe like a basic river, maybe like the Green River. My family could raft while we kayak. Would you guide me down the river?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And that began a 6-year journey to learn to kayak, and then ultimately take Harlan up on his offer and kayak down the whole Grand Canyon. And Harlan was like a river Yoda to me. He's a great friend, but he's also like, he taught me a lot about the mindset of kayaking. You can flip, you can roll. In fact, you're going to get knocked over a lot. It's not like climbing where, like sometimes you don't want to fall. But kayaking, you get knocked over a lot. It's totally perfectly okay to get knocked over.
Although, well, I'm not going to talk about it at the end of the book, but it wasn't quite perfectly okay.
It wasn't okay. There's a lot of fear. In fact, for me, kayaking was the hardest, scariest thing I've ever done. It was terrifying.
It has to be.
It was terrifying.
You're at the mercy. You're just like in the river. You even leading, you can throw a piece of gear in and flip in and stop.
Yeah. And
then everything stops, other than unless there's lightning or those few brief times when you've got to get out of there. But everything stops and you collect yourself.
Do they say climbing is a lot of boredom intermixed with moments of sheer terror? Kayaking, I think, was like mostly sheer terror and intermixed with moments of fun.
Right. And breathing and like relaxing.
So yeah, there's no breaks. And so you go in and I can't see what's happening. I have friends who are behind me. Again, not doing crazy stuff, but like I have a team of friends around me. There's one guy guiding me through these high-tech radio system, communicates in relative real time. He's saying small left, small right, charge, which means hammer that rapid, that wave that's about to knock you over. Sometimes I'd even try to say brace left, but a lot of times those commands are hard to time. So a lot of it's just reacting and feeling what's under my boat and getting hammered and trying to react to what my friends are telling me and trying to just let your mind be still. And there were moments of that by the end where it was past my brain. Like my brain was just an impediment in the process. I was definitely down in the nervous system, sort of experiencing the river. And those brief moments are beautiful and they're worth it, even though there's kind of a lot of fear to kind of work through before you get those brief flashes.
So yeah, you just mentioned Rob as a guy that was integral in this kayaking thing, and also your climbing past as well. You also mentioned Mark Wellman, who's kind of a legend in terms of having lost use of his legs and still maintaining this incredible climbing career. And in No Barriers, and I mentioned this earlier about your friends and these people that are attracted to your adventures to come on these things with you, and when these little germs happen at the party and you wake up slightly hungover, but you put the call out and there's people that are like, let's do this. So Can you talk about some of those folks?
Yeah, well, I think the most important, the most seminal kind of moment was getting to climb with Mark Wellman and Hugh Herr. Mark, paraplegic, he fell in the Sierras. He thought his climbing life was over, but he learned this crazy system of basically doing pull-ups up the rock face, and his friend anchors the rope, and Mark climbed El Capitan, and first paraplegic to do that, just broke through massive barriers, 7,000 pull-ups in 8 days. That's like, my God. And Hugh Herr, who some of you may not know, is a double-leg amputee. He built his own climbing feet, little climbing feet that he used to wedge into cracks, like seams, like not even human feet could barely stand up in these things. So he became a better climber as an amputee than when he had legs in certain ways, and now he runs the biomechatronics laboratory at MIT, building $60 million legs for people. But I got to climb with these guys, Ancient Art, out near Moab, and we were like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We were this broken team, and I looked at those guys and I thought, what is that light that is inside people? This Mark Wellman, climbing is not easy for him. He's scraping and bleeding his way up these like chimneys, and there's like dirt falling in his face, and I hate to be graphic, but like paras wear a pee bag like over their penis, and his pee bag ripped off, and so the guy smelled like urine. And I thought, you have to endure so much suffering to do these things. Like, nobody thinks about what that map looks like between whatever that safe dark place is and whatever the mountain top looks like. And so for me, more than an adventure book, No Barriers was like trying to illuminate what that map looks like for people. And so I kind of delved into this map, like this murky path that people take on their road to doing whatever they want to do. And in that process, I studied like amazing people that are my heroes, like Kyle Maynard, who has arms and legs missing at the knees and at the elbows, and he climbs mountain. He climbed Aconcagua. Mm-hmm. I mean, crabbed his way to the top of Aconcagua. Right. Just so people like that, I wanted to understand them better, and not just people with physical disabilities either, but people who had been sort of crushed psychologically, mentally as well, and how do they rebuild. And I found that these people spiral out in that rebuilding process. They spiral out in these pretty crazy, awesome new directions, and it leads them to these great new discoveries. So for me, it was an awesome thing to learn and sort of figure out.
So it's a little bit of a cliche, I suppose, to talk about the silver lining or the good from the bad, or however it gets played out. But listening to you for an hour here and reading your book, No Barriers, it's kind of this crazy thing where these opportunities, for lessons, for wisdom, for whatever you want to call it, have come out of this thing that, I don't even want to say it happened to you. It was something that was in your fate, or it was in this thing that you were born with. Is that in your perspective in terms of that? Or
I heard a blind person being interviewed at No Barriers the other day, and they were like, blindness was a gift. And I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That's what I mean. I'm like treading into that.
Yeah, I don't know if I go that far. I think I would take to see if I could.
Okay, good. All
yeah,
right.
So I'm like a little bit realist in that way. Right. But I will say this. What the great paradox is, and there's really not an answer, it's just a great paradox, is that, in kayaking, for instance, you try to stay on the line. the line is the easiest and most and safest way through life, through the rapid. And yeah, you try to desperately stay on that line. You hardly ever do, but every now and then you do, and it's cool, and you're psyched, and that's what you're trying to do. But believe, and by the way, if you fall off the line, your chances of emerging on the other side safe and sound are like reduced. But at the same time, that's where you learn everything.
Right.
It's off the line. So I'm not saying that, like it's good to be blind, but what I am saying, and what I do make an argument for the book, is that there are ways to take the shit that absolutely destroys you and find a way to kind of build a map and that sort of makes your life awesome and not this tragedy.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot. It's been amazing sitting down with you. I'm so glad that we hooked up, and you invited me into your home, which is nice. Also extra special. And this has been an amazing hour. I really appreciate you sitting down.
Was it okay to say shit on your podcast?
Oh, totally. We can say shit and
all right, good.
Whatever else you say. So.
Nice.
But thanks a lot for hanging out with us.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Erik for sitting down and having me in his house and everything else. What a pleasure to talk to the guy. Just a genuine, honest guy, sharing all that about losing his sight when he was a fragile teenager. My God. Teenagers are having a hard enough time the way it is. Check out his book, No Barriers, anywhere they sell books, which is pretty much a couple places these days, it feels like. Also, the organization that he works with, No Barriers. I believe it's at nobarriersusa.org. Maybe you can get involved, find out what they're up to, helping people enjoy the outdoors. Yeah, the guy's working hard to change the world, so got to support him. Also, you can support the Enormocast by going to enormocast.com and clicking on the Help Out tab. Is that as important as what Erik is doing? No, it is not. But, you guys are enjoying it, so consider helping out. Click on the tab, bunch of things you can do, including donating if that's what you feel like doing. Don't like to beg, but hey, if you want to kick down a little bit of money for the episodes you've listened to, feel free. All right, beautiful weather out here in Colorado. It is coming into its own as far as climbing season. So everybody get out there, have fun, and of course, remember to check your knot.
What kind of bike do you have?
It's a sledgehammer.
Dang. You got shocks, pegs. Lucky. You ever take it off any sweet jumps? You got like 3 feet of air that time. Can I try it really quick? Dang.